Hi, I'm Jason Bill, the owner of JustNewListings.com Realty, and I wanted to cover with you a really interesting and dramatic subject today, and that is earnest money deposits. The acronym for that would be EMD for short, and it brings a number of issues to the table, and especially from a buyer agent's perspective, how to protect your client, how to protect their money from being trapped and in limbo if there's a disagreement between the purchaser and the seller, etc. What can you do? And if you're the buyer, how can you educate your own agent on this matter, since probably 1 in 1,000 are doing anything to protect you and your earnest money deposit, which is a sad state of affairs. I'll just leave it at that. Earnest money deposit. This is what gives you skin in the game. Let's say you're going to buy a house for $500,000. You are going to put immediately, when you come to terms and have a contract, you're going to put a little bit of money down. It's part of your down payment, put into escrow in advance. This gives you skin in the game. This tells the seller that you have full intention of going through with the contract, because if you default, then your earnest money deposit is at risk. And at that point, what happens, that's what we're headed to in this video. So, for example, with a $500,000 house, you might have an earnest money deposit. Typically, it would be about $10,000. The best buyer agents will do their best to minimize your earnest money deposits when possible. That way you have as little skin in the game as possible. That way your options are as open as possible, because life is crazy and there's curveballs, and you never know what's going to happen. So what happens if you're under contract and you decide you do not want to buy the house anymore? And even if you're within a window, let's say you have a 7-day home inspection contingency, and you decide the day after going under contract or 3 days later, you don't want the home anymore. Your earnest money has already been deposited. You have full right to get all of it back because you are not defaulting on the contract. You have a full week window for that home inspection contingency. And at that point, is it that simple? Or is there more to it than that? Well, I wish it was that simple, because as a broker, as the owner of JustNewListings.com Realty, it would make my life easier occasionally. What happens is, if you want to void the contract, even if you are within your very plainly stated contractual language, if you are supposed to be getting your EMD back, the managing broker of the office where your money is being held, he cannot, at least in most states, everything is completely regional and you have to check with your own broker with whom you're working, but the broker cannot just release the earnest money deposit back to the buyer who is supposed to be getting it in so many scenarios. His hands, he is essentially handcuffed. He cannot release the money back, even though everybody knows it's supposed to go back to that buyer, unless he gets it in writing from all parties. And essentially everyone fills out their form and says how much of the pie, the earnest money deposit, is supposed to go to which party, the buyer or the owner of the property. Now, in most cases, 9 out of 10, everyone just signs real fast, and we put the full amount of the earnest money deposit, and it goes back to the buyer, and it's all done in a day. Once in a while, though, if the seller is upset, or if there's any questions whatsoever where they feel like, well, they've lost time on the market a few days, therefore they should at least get $1,000 of that earnest money deposit, they will not sign off on the release for the earnest money funds, and instead will try and split it with the buyer or negotiate it, and therefore the broker cannot give the money back to the buyer. Legally, his hands are tied. And how do we handle that? How do we prevent it in the first place? Well, let's look at some of the language here and help you understand it. Right here. In the event the transaction is not consummated, the principal broker or supervising broker shall hold such funds in escrow until all principals, that means all parties, to the transaction have agreed in writing as to their disposition. So everyone has to agree on who gets the money and how much they're getting. If one side doesn't sign off on it, then the broker has to wait till a court of competent jurisdiction orders such disbursement of the funds, or the broker can pay the funds to the principal to the transaction who is entitled to receive them in accordance with the clear and explicit terms of the contract which establish the deposit. However, in that situation, prior to disbursement, the broker shall give written notice to the principal to the transaction that is not receiving the deposit by either hand delivery, certified mail, blah, 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 that this payment will be made unless a written protest is received by the broker within 30 days. So the broker, if not all parties are signing off, and the broker wants to send the money to the buyer whom his firm is representing, he has to send a letter to the seller saying, I'm going to disperse the funds as follows in 30 days unless I have a written protest from you on this matter. And if he does get a written protest, well, then you're going to have to wait for the local court to work it out over the course of months probably, and either in the local civil court or in some sort of arbitration. But generally, but the point is that would put your money, earnest money deposit, it would be trapped for months probably in that scenario. So even if it's clear to all parties that you're supposed to get your money, and even if the broker issues this letter, he still has to wait another 30 days if the other side hasn't signed off on it, and make sure that they don't file a written protest with him. So it has a potential for a lot of drama. Imagine you want to go buy another house, but your earnest money is trapped in the previous transaction that you voided 2 weeks ago. Very frustrating indeed. How do we get around it? It's not that hard. Probably the best trick of all that I found for just taking the drama out of real estate transactions is an addendum up front when you submit your contract. And it's one sentence in most cases. All parties agree that the earnest money deposit will be deposited after all parties have signed off on the home inspection addendum. So in other words, you're saying that everyone is going to, that no money is going to be deposited until the buyer and seller have already worked through their home inspection issues and signed off on a home inspection addendum together, which is at least usually that process going to be a week. So it's keeping the earnest money funds in the buyer's hands until for sure everybody is moving forward with the contract. Because sometimes in the negotiating of home inspection items, there can be drama, there can be clashes, bad blood can be created, which lends itself to a buyer's earnest money deposit funds being stuck in escrow and no way to get them out without going through formal proceedings. In 3 years, I've only had one case where the seller wasn't okay with this obvious commonsensical addendum. So we're talking, 80 people have all signed off on it. Sellers saying, that's fine. You don't have to deposit any earnest money deposit funds until we hammer through this home inspection addendum and negotiate all the items, and then we'll deposit the funds. So that's the workaround for it. Take advantage. Add this addendum to every contract purchase. The parties hereby agree that earnest money deposit funds will be deposited after all parties have signed off on the home inspection addendum. This will take a lot of stress out of your work week. If you're a buyer, it will protect you. If you're a buyer agent, it will make you a rock star in the eyes of your people, because they'll see you're doing something that no other buyer agent has done for them before. You're going the extra mile and contractually protecting their money, and buyers appreciate that. And this is the right and commonsensical way to do earnest money deposits and to handle them, etc. All right, have a good day, and I hope this has been informative to you.